Hi guys, today we're taking a look at how to make mayonnaise right at home. You don't need to buy it, you can make fresh egg mayonnaise right at home. It's very simple. The main thing that worries most people when they think of making homemade mayonnaise is the emulsification. An emulsion is when the egg and the oil come together to make that creamy sauce that we all love in our sandwiches. So sometimes the emulsification process can go wrong and the mayonnaise splits. But if you follow the simple steps, you can make a perfect mayonnaise right at home. I'm also showing you how to make mayonnaise in a blender or the canister jar that comes with your handheld immersion blender or the immersion blender itself. They're all very simple. Let's take a look at each method. So first, let's take a look at the blender method. Now we're using a regular blender. You need a blender with a lid like this with a hole on the top of the lid. So in our recipe, we're using 1 egg for our mayonnaise. Although the classic real mayonnaise uses only egg yolk, using a whole egg actually helps the emulsification process and gives you a fail-proof mayonnaise that tastes great. So you want to add 1 large egg to your blender. And try to use good, large, pasteurized eggs. Pasteurized eggs are always better when you're making any recipe that involves raw eggs. Make sure the blender is sterile and dry. A dry blender always gives the best results. And make sure that the blender and the blender jar is not overheated from a previous session. It should be cool when you start to make the mayonnaise for best results. Once we add our egg, we're also going to add vinegar. You can use any type of vinegar you like. You can use white sweet balsamic vinegar. Here I'm using regular vinegar, 1 tablespoon of vinegar. Although when I make mayonnaise, I usually use just about 3/4 of a tablespoon. And just a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. You can always add salt later. Now I'm also adding 1/4 teaspoon of mustard powder. That's dry mustard powder. And a 1/4 teaspoon of paprika. I'm also adding a dash of cayenne pepper. Using a funnel like this helps me to pour the oil into the blender jar. So I'm going to place it on top like that. And you want to turn on your blender on a high speed. Once the egg and the vinegar combines and gets a little creamy on the bottom like this, we can start to drizzle in our oil. This is 1 cup of oil that we're using. That's 240 mils. Now this process takes a little bit of patience. You need to pour the oil in at a steady stream. The emulsification process is most important in the initial 30 seconds of blending. So you need to really concentrate and pour in the oil in a steady thread-like stream. Now you'll see the mayonnaise starting to get creamier and thicker. Once there's just around a 1/4 cup of the oil remaining in the cup, I'm going to add a teaspoon of lemon juice. This adds flavor and helps in the emulsification process once again. So we're just going to continue drizzling in the remaining 1/4 cup of oil. You will notice that the sound of the blender changes when the mayonnaise is nice and thick. It sounds like it's having trouble blending. It's like a chopping noise. I set my blender on the highest speed. And you can see the texture of our mayonnaise. It's a very creamy mayonnaise. Now, if you are used to that slight bit of sweetness in store-bought mayonnaise, you can always add a little bit of sugar. I tend to add a little bit to my mayonnaise and a dash of pepper as well. That's nice. So this mayonnaise thickens a little bit once you refrigerate it. The yellow color comes from the mustard powder. A very tasty, homemade, fresh mayonnaise. Next, we're using the mini processor or the small canister blender that comes with your immersion blender. This is very handy. And I do use sunflower oil. You can use other forms of oil. Some people like to use groundnut oil or soybean oil. I prefer to use sunflower oil. So we add the egg, and same as before, a 1/4 teaspoon of mustard powder. For a thicker and more strong flavored mayonnaise, you can also use up to a tablespoon of Dijon mustard. Some people love that flavor. I use that in gourmet style burgers, but today I'm just using the mustard powder. And again, 1 tablespoon or 3/4 of a tablespoon here of vinegar. Now we add a little bit of oil just to get it going in the beginning and give that a mix. Again, I have this set on the highest speed. First, you can see the egg and the oil has mixed. It has not split. It's very thin in consistency, but the oil has not split. So now we can add another 1/4 part of the oil and continue again till the mixture thickens again. You can see the color changing and becoming lighter. It's thickened a little bit. I can pour another 1/4 part of the oil again and continue. You can see it starts to get thicker and creamier. So now we're going to season with salt. A 1/4 teaspoon of salt to begin with. You can add more later, and pepper. This time I'm not adding paprika or cayenne pepper, I'm just adding black pepper. And we add the remainder of the oil and continues till our sauce is nice and thick. Now sometimes you might notice that the oil seems to come to the surface, so you get an oily looking mayonnaise. This is not a problem, just add a tablespoon of cool water and you will see the effect. Water actually helps in the emulsification process as well. Just add a tiny bit so you can see how perfect the mayonnaise turned out, nice and creamy and thick. I like to add a little bit of lemon juice just for flavor. And that's our second batch of mayonnaise. You can see how creamy it is. It's also quite tasty. And it has the texture of store-bought mayonnaise with that slight jiggle to it. And our third method, the immersion blender method. If you don't have an immersion blender at home, I really do recommend it. I find it useful for so many things in my kitchen. It's also so easy to clean up afterwards. So once again, we're using the 1 egg, 1 cup of oil recipe. 1 large egg goes into this jar. 1 tablespoon of vinegar, a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, pepper. Here I'm only adding pepper, no mustard. Add a little bit of the oil to begin with. Give it a blend till it thickens and becomes light in color. Now you can keep on adding oil as you keep blending on a high speed, and lift and lower your immersion blender as you do so. This helps to make the sauce nice and smooth and creamy and thick. Add just a tablespoon of water at the end to remove that oily layer, if there is any. And you can see the mayonnaise is turning out quite perfectly. Let's take a look at the texture. You see it's very thick, just like store-bought mayonnaise. And of course, if you like that little bit of sugar, as I mentioned before, just add a quarter teaspoon just to give it a slight tinge of sweetness. Some people tend to like that. So we have made mayonnaise very simply, very quickly in 3 different methods. Personally, I like them all. I like mustard sometimes when I like that bit of extra flavor and creaminess, but the mayonnaise without any mustard is just fine as well. I also find the immersion blender method the easiest. It gives a really good texture. The mayonnaise without mustard gives a whiter color mayonnaise. I found the immersion blender method the easiest overall because it's so easy to clean up afterwards. The blender, on the other hand, you need to wash it thoroughly afterwards, and it can be a little tricky sometimes. So which of these methods would you prefer? And what additions do you like to your mayonnaise? And how did your first attempt at making mayonnaise go? Please let us know in the comments section below. Hope you enjoyed this quick video recipe. Thanks a lot for watching. See you next time. Bye.